Hey there. Ready to unlock the power of SQL for data analytics?
You bet.
We're diving into Vlad's YouTube course, Intuitive SQL for Data Analytics, and let me tell you, he really breaks it down.
He does. And you know what? It's amazing how many people think sequels is this big scary thing only for engineers.
Right.
But Vlad just blows that myth right out of the water.
He does.
It's for anyone who wants to ask questions about their data, period.
Yeah, and what I love is how he connects it to something most of us use every day, spreadsheets. And it's like,
Yeah.
I can totally see how this works.
Exactly. And speaking of accessibility, he recommends Google BigQuery, which has this awesome free tier.
Oh yeah, tell me about it. 10 gigabytes of storage free every
A
month.
terabyte of query processing free every month. It's incredible.
It's more than enough to get your hands dirty and start analyzing some pretty hefty data sets.
Yeah.
Especially when you're just starting out. You don't need to shell out any of your hard-earned cash to get going.
Exactly. And one of the first things Vlad points out is that working with SQL does require a bit of a mindset shift.
Definitely. Especially if you're coming from that, spreadsheet world.
Yeah,
He talks about thinking in terms of tables instead of cells, right?
absolutely. And also understanding the relationships between those tables, that's key.
And this is where that term schema comes in, which, okay, I'll admit, sounded a little intimidating at first.
It does sound a little intimidating.
Because it's really just a blueprint, right? It's like, here's how your data is organized.
Yeah, it's like the difference between looking at like individual puzzle pieces versus seeing the entire picture come together.
Totally. And speaking of organization, one thing that's really important in SQL is this concept of data types,
Right. Absolutely.
which is a little different from spreadsheets, where you can kind of like throw anything into a cell.
Yeah, it's a little more, it's a little stricter.
It's structured.
You're setting the rules at the beginning.
Yeah, you're telling SQL, like, this column, only numbers allowed.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
If it's for ages, you're telling it to only accept numbers. And this keeps your data nice and clean and consistent.
Consistent, yes. It prevents those, why isn't this working,
Yeah.
moments later on.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, one thing that kind of threw me for a loop was this whole concept of order of operations in SQL.
Oh, yeah.
It's not as simple as just like, I'm going to write my code line by line, and that's how it's going to run. So tell me about that. Why is that so important?
Yeah, that's actually a concept that trips up a lot of beginners.
Sure.
But it's really crucial for writing effective SQL queries.
And so it's not as straightforward as it seems.
It's not. Imagine following a recipe, but instead of going step by step, you try to do everything at once.
Yeah, it's not going to work out too well.
Your cake's not going to taste very good.
Right.
It's the same with SQL. So Vlad breaks it down into a couple of key levels.
Okay.
First, there's the order that you write the clauses in.
Okay.
So that's like the basic grammar of your SQL query.
Got it.
Then there's the logical order that SQL uses to actually understand what you're asking.
Okay.
And then finally, there's what's called the execution order, which is the actual sequence of steps SQL takes to get your results. Yeah, so it's quite a process.
Multi-layered.
It is multi-layered.
Just how do we keep our SQL from turning into a disaster?
Well, that's where understanding that order of operations becomes so crucial, because once you get that, then writing effective SQL queries becomes a lot smoother.
Got it. Got it. Okay, so to help us build those queries, Vlad introduces what he calls the building blocks of a SQL query. And those are select, from, and where.
Those are the big ones.
Right.
Yes.
I always think of them as like the verbs and nouns of your sentences.
Yes, exactly. And he starts with from, which logically makes sense because you need to tell SQL where to get the data from before you can do anything with it.
You got to start with your ingredients, right?
You got it.
I'm all about a good analogy, so it's like you wouldn't walk up to a blender and expect to make a smoothie without putting anything in it.
Yeah, exactly.
So from is like, here's my data.
Exactly.
Then we go to select.
Select is where you choose which columns you want to see in your results.
So if my from is like all of the fruits and vegetables in my refrigerator,
Yes,
my select is, okay, but for this smoothie, I only want strawberries, bananas.
you got it.
Okay.
It's picking out what you want.
And then we get to where.
Where is where things get really fun. That's where you get to set your criteria.
That's the really powerful part, right?
Yeah.
You can be like, ooh, I only want the customers who spent over $100.
Mm-hmm.
Or, back to my smoothie, I only want the right bananas.
You got it. You're refining, you're filtering down to exactly what you need.
And what I love is that he doesn't just stop at like, here's how you retrieve the data.
Yeah.
He actually shows you how you can transform that data
Mm-hmm.
using SQL.
He does.
So you can like create new columns, do calculations, even just rename your columns, all within your query. which is so powerful.
Absolutely. And he even introduces these things called logical operators.
Right, like A and D or not T. And that's where you can really get specific with your filtering, right?
Absolutely. You can say things like, show me all the customers who made a purchase in the last month. A&D spent over $100, or show me all the products that are either out of stock or have low inventory.
Yes.
Yeah, so it gives you a lot more control over what you see.
And this is where that whole order of operations thing comes back, right?
Yeah,
Because where you put that A and D or that OR, it's going to change the outcome.
it absolutely will, yeah.
Okay, so we've covered the basics of selecting, filtering, transforming data within like one table, right?
We have.
But what about when we have data in multiple tables? That's where it gets even more powerful because we can use these things called set operations.
That's where it gets really fun.
Like union,
Yeah,
right?
union and intersect.
Okay, so tell me about those. How do those work?
Okay, so union would be like combining all your fruits and veggies from different baskets into one giant smoothie.
Okay,
You're merging the results of two or more queries into a single view.
got it.
But there's a catch, and this is super important.
What's that?
The tables that you are combining need to have the same number of columns, and those columns need to have matching data types.
Okay, so you can't mix apples and oranges
Exactly.
or you'll get a SQL error.
You'll get a SQL error.
So that's where that whole, like, being really specific about your data types early on really comes in handy.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's union. What about intersect?
Intersect. Instead of combining everything, it finds the common elements between two data sets.
Okay,
So it's like comparing your grocery list to what's actually in your fridge.
I love that. Okay.
Intersect would show you only the items that are on both lists,
Okay.
the ones you already have in your refrigerator.
So it's finding the overlap.
Exactly.
Okay, now I feel like we have some serious data powers.
We do. And you know what else is really cool? That create table statement.
Oh yeah, tell me about that.
So imagine like you run this complex query, you got these golden insights, right?
Okay.
You can actually save that whole result set as a brand new table in your database.
It's like you've taken a photo, right? You don't have to paint that same picture every time.
Exactly. You got a snapshot.
Yeah. And Vlad also mentions that create table if not exists, which I gotta say, I'm a little obsessed with that little clause because it saved me from myself so many times.
It's those little things in SQL that make it so powerful.
It is. Okay, so speaking of powerful, let's talk about subqueries. This is where we get into queries within queries.
The Russian nesting dolls of SQL.
They always intimidated me a little bit, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
Like, are we going down a rabbit hole? What's happening here?
They can be a little much at first, but Vlad gives this great example, right?
Go.
He talks about wanting to find, say, all the customers who've spent more than the average customer.
Okay.
So the subquery would first go and figure out, like, what's the average spending across all customers?
Okay.
And then the main query would use that result to zero in on your big spenders.
Got it. So it's kind of like a two-step process.
Yeah, exactly.
Find that average, then use that to filter.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this is where that order of operations thing we talked about comes in again.
Right, because SQL needs to do that calculation first.
It needs to run that subquery first.
Yeah, you can't bake a cake if you don't know how much flour to put in.
Exactly. You got to start with your base.
Okay.
Now, subqueries, they're super powerful, but they can get a little long-winded when you're dealing with, like, lots of nested logic.
Right, you can get lost in there.
You can definitely get lost in there. So that's where Vlad introduces these things called common table expressions.
Okay, CTEs.
CTEs, yeah. Think of them as like temporary named subqueries.
Okay, so instead of those like nested subqueries that start to look like a data labyrinth, we can be like, you're section A, you do this.
Right. Yeah, you're giving them a name. You're giving them a purpose.
You're organizing. I like it.
It makes your code so much more organized.
And much more readable.
And easier to read, exactly.
And Vlad even shows how you can like chain multiple CTEs together.
You can.
So you can be like, okay, first you do this. Then based on that, you do this.
Yeah, it's like building a little data pipeline
Totally.
where each CTE is performing a specific task.
But he's also very clear that it's not just like CTEs are great, use them all the time.
He does say that. He says there's a time and a place for both.
Right. You don't always need the chainsaw.
Exactly. Sometimes you just need a regular saw.
Okay, so we've talked about filtering data, manipulating data kind of within a table, right?
Right.
But what about when we want to like really combine data from different tables based on like a shared connection?
Now you're talking about the heart of relational databases.
Joins.
Joins.
Okay, so I'll be honest, I definitely stumbled over joins before.
They can be a little tricky, yeah.
What's the key to really understanding joins?
Vlad uses a great analogy here. He talks about it like a detective matching clues.
Ooh, I like this.
Right.
Okay.
So imagine you got one table with like suspect information,
Uh,
and you've got another table with their alibis.
okay.
The join lets you connect those two tables together, maybe using like a shared suspect ID column
Right.
to see if anyone's story's not adding up.
Got it. So it's like finding the missing links, right, between our different data sets.
Exactly. And just like there are different ways a detective might go about solving a case, there are different types of joins, each with their own logic and purpose.
Okay, so let's talk about those different types. Let's start with the basic one, the inner join. What's that all about?
An inner join, that's like the most common one, think of it as a very exclusive party.
Okay.
Only the rows that have a match in both tables, based on your join condition, get to go to the party.
So it has to be on both guest lists.
It has to be on both guest lists to get into that party.
Okay.
So it's like finding that common ground between two data sets.
Got it, got it. What about the left join?
A left join is a little bit more inclusive. So it says, let's invite everyone from the table on the left, even if they don't have a date, to the party from the table on the right.
Okay, so it's like we're not leaving anyone out.
Exactly. You're saying, like, show me everything from this table, and if there's a match in the other table, great. But if not, I still want to see it.
Okay.
So this is really useful if you're trying to find, like, customers who haven't made a purchase yet or products that haven't been assigned to a category.
Right. We don't want to miss any potential opportunities.
Exactly. You want to see everything.
Okay, what about joining a table to itself? That just sounds like we've gone meta.
It sounds more complicated than it is.
Okay.
Vlad gives an example of an employee table where one column indicates the employee's manager. So by joining that table to itself, you can actually create a structure where each row shows you an employee's name, but then also shows you their manager's name.
So it's like creating a family tree, but with data.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes more sense. And the cool part is that once we've joined these tables, now we can apply all that filtering, sorting, grouping stuff that we learned about before, right?
Absolutely.
And it's like the possibilities are pretty much endless.
They're endless, but this is where it's important to really, really understand the logic
Behind those joins.
behind each type of join. Yeah.
Okay.
Because that's going to save you a lot of heartache down the road.
Okay, and that brings us to the next level of our analysis, right?
Yeah.
Which is this idea of grouping and aggregations.
Yes.
So we've connected our tables, and now we want to start actually analyzing that combined data in a meaningful way.
Exactly. We're going from looking at the data to actually summarizing it, analyzing it, finding those trends and patterns.
So if joins are like connecting the dots, grouping and aggregations are like seeing the bigger picture. Yeah.
Exactly. Imagine like you're staring at this massive spreadsheet with thousands and thousands of sales transactions, right?
Okay, yeah.
You can see each individual sale, but it's hard to get a sense of like, how is the business actually doing?
It's like trying to appreciate a painting by staring at each individual brushstroke. You're not really getting the whole picture.
Exactly. You just see a blur of colors.
Right.
So grouping and aggregation, that's where those SQL functions come in, like SUM, AVG, count, MIN, max.
Oh, yeah, these are the big ones. These are the ones that let us take all that data and turn it into something actually meaningful, right?
It's like it condenses all those thousands of rows into a few key metrics.
Exactly.
And to use those functions effectively, that's where the GRUB by clause comes in.
Okay, so tell me about Groupie By. How does that work?
So GRUB by Y lets you group your data based on a shared characteristic, right?
Okay.
So it could be something like product category, customer location.
So instead of just seeing every single sale, I could use Groupie By to see total sales by category.
Exactly. Or like average order value by month.
Okay, this is starting to make a lot more sense. So it's like we're organizing our giant jumble of puzzle pieces into like little piles based on shape or color, right?
Exactly. And just like you can like sort those puzzle pieces further once they're in their groups, you can use multiple columns in your group by Y to create even more granular groupings.
Oh, interesting. So I could group by product category and D month to see how those sales have changed over time.
Exactly.
Oh, that's very cool. But you did mention that there's a catch. There's always a catch, right?
There's always a catch. And this one trips up a lot of beginners. It's called the single value rule.
Single value rule. Okay. Hit me with it.
Okay, so this rule essentially says that when you're using group by Y, you can only include columns in your select statement that are either part of the grouping itself or wrapped in one of those aggregate functions.
Okay, so if I'm grouping by product category, I can include the product category column and then like the sum of sales, but I couldn't just throw in something random like customer name.
Exactly. Because, think about it, the customer name wouldn't really make sense within each of those product category groupings.
Right, because it would be different for every single sale. So
Exactly.
you'd have like a jumbled mess.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's like SQL saying you got to be consistent with your grouping.
Exactly.
Okay, I like it. So what if we want to filter our results based on those aggregated values? Like if we only want to see the product categories that had total sales over like $10,000, can we just use a where clause for that?
You can't.
Okay,
And that's where the having clause comes in.
having. All right.
Yeah, it's like the where clause's cooler, older sibling
Okay, why is it cooler?
because it's designed specifically to handle those aggregated values.
Oh,
So you're saying, show me all the product categories, but only the ones where the sum of sales is greater than $10,000.
gotcha. So it's applying that filter after the aggregation has happened.
Exactly.
Okay, that is very cool and powerful.
It is powerful.
Man, we have covered so much ground. We went from selecting and filtering data to joining tables and now grouping and aggregating to see these big picture trends. This is great.
It is powerful, but hold on tight. We're not done yet.
Oh no. What else is there?
Because Vlad throws in this whole other level of analysis, these things called window functions.
Window functions. Okay. Is this where I need like an extra cup of coffee?
It might help. It might help. But think of them as like the secret sauce that really makes SQL sing. They can be a little tough to wrap your head around at first, but once you get them, it's like a whole new world opens up.
Okay, so without making my head explode, how would you describe window functions?
Okay, so imagine you're analyzing like sales data again, right?
Sure.
And you want to know not just the total sales for each month,
Okay.
but also how each month's sales compare to like the previous month
Okay.
without having to write like a whole bunch of crazy queries.
So it's like we're adding like context.
Exactly, yeah. You're adding a layer of context to your analysis.
Okay, like it.
So window functions let you perform these calculations across like a set of rows
Okay.
that are related to the current row you're looking at without actually changing the structure of your table.
Okay, so how does SQL know what rows we're talking about? Like what's the context?
That is where the over clause comes in.
Over clause, okay.
It's like the magic wand of window functions.
Okay.
So within the over clause, you can use this thing called partition by.
Okay, this sounds familiar.
It's similar to grew UP by Y.
Okay.
It's like dividing your data into these separate groups.
So if we're thinking about our sales, I could partition by like product category again.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that means the window function would be applied separately to each product category.
Okay, got it.
And then within each of those partitions, you can even use order by.
Okay, to say like look at it chronologically
Exactly.
by month or whatever.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've partitioned our data. We've said like how we want you to kind of look at the order of it. Now what? What kind of calculations are we doing?
So Vlad uses this example of like calculating a running total of sales over time.
Okay.
So instead of just seeing the total sales for like January, February, March,
Right?
you can actually see how those sales accumulate over time.
Oh, I like that. So you're getting more than just like a snapshot. You're seeing the trend.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's just one example. You can calculate things like the rank of each product within its category based on sales. You could find the top 3 customers within each region based on their order value.
Okay, so we can get really specific and really like most like visualize those trends even more.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like you can pinpoint, like zoom in on exactly what you need within those little windows.
So cool. And all of this is happening without us even like changing our original table, right?
Yeah.
Just,
Exactly. It's like you're just adding like an extra lens on top of your data.
I love that. That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
You're not changing the underlying data itself, but you're getting so much more information out of it.
So powerful. Okay, great. So Vlad does give us this great resource to practice all of this.
He does.
Because I feel like as much as we've talked about this, until you actually like get in there and start writing SQL queries,
You've got to get your hands dirty.
you really do. It's not going to click.
Yeah.
He recommends this website that has 42 SQL exercises.
Yes.
Which I love because it's one thing to like understand it conceptually. But when you have to actually apply it,
That's when the real learning happens.
that's when you're like, wait, how does that having clause work again? And you got to go back. Okay, well, this has been incredible. We have gone from SQL 0 to maybe not hero,
Not quite here.
but definitely feeling a lot more comfortable about navigating this world.
Definitely a skilled apprentice.
Skilled apprentice, yes. Well, thank you so much for breaking this all down. It's been so helpful to hear you talk through these concepts and give these amazing
Of
analogies.
course, glad to be here.
And to you out there, listen, go check out Vlad's course. It is fantastic. We'll link to it in the show notes. But more importantly, go start practicing. You got this. Until next time on The Deep Dive, thanks for listening.